You are about to enjoy a production of the alll Wellness Network. This is Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey Vick, and I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to the Wellness Sisterhood. We are going to be switching it up a bit today, talking about a menstrual cycle in my life. It's a little bit of a unique take on the day in my life trend or week in my life trend. I thought it would be fun to basically talk through how I structure my month based on my menstrual cycle and how I look at nutrition, exercise, rest, hydration, motivation, work, all of these things through the lens of my menstrual cycle. Welcome back to Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey Vick, a board-certified orthopedic doctor of physical therapy, a pelvic floor physical therapist, and the owner and founder of the alll Wellness Sisterhood. And the menstrual cycle program is releasing tomorrow. By the time this episode comes out, it'll come out on Monday. It releases tomorrow, which is April 1st. So this is sort of an episode to hopefully show how easy it is to work with your menstrual cycle, work with your body rather than against it. My goal with this is, again, I love these vlogs and watching other people's day in the lives because I think there's something comforting about watching like someone super normal go through their life and realizing, oh, my life is similar to theirs, or oh, I like how they did this. I might implement that in my own routine. Like it's just kind of homey and comforting. So I'm hoping that's what this episode is today, in addition to sort of simplifying some of the concepts surrounding how to actually apply working with your body through the lens of the menstrual cycle into your own lives. So by this time, we've done a ton of menstrual cycle episodes, whether it was back in the fall, whether it's the ones leading up to this one, however you slice it, we have done a ton of menstrual cycle episodes. So I'll link all of the ones so far below. That way, if you are just joining us for this first time, welcome. We are so happy to have you here. But also, that way you can go back and listen to those episodes and get caught up on the menstrual cycle, learn all about your menstrual cycle, and go through the history of the menstrual cycle. We've had just like so many fun topics and education and action about the menstrual cycle. So I'll link those for you below, in addition to the link to sign up for the menstrual cycle program when it releases tomorrow. So with that, welcome to a menstrual cycle in my life, where we chat all the things I do in my life related kind of to my menstrual cycle, or the reason that I've started implementing them and doing things in this way is because I notice my body feels a certain way during my menstrual cycle. And so this is the way that I sort of navigate how I feel with what I want to accomplish that day, whether it be from a fueling standpoint, from a movement standpoint, from a work standpoint, hydration, rest, recovery, all of the factors that our menstrual cycle controls. So I'll break it into sort of like week 1 to week 4, or starting with like my period, going into my follicular phase, then my ovulatory phase, then my luteal phase. So it'll kind of follow this flow of a month. Historically, my periods have been 28 or 29 days with a bleeding pattern of about like 5 days. It has been longer at periods, but right now that's what I'm working with. So that'll be what my sort of like menstrual cycle in my life is based on. So almost a month, but not quite. So I'll break it up into sort of like weeks based on like period, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and then luteal phase. So some of the categories we'll talk through are workouts, nutrition, work or professional, rest, recovery, and mindset as well. And then I'll sprinkle a few little like things that I've learned about my body throughout this episode. From a workout standpoint, just in general across all of the phases, I try and get about 4 workouts on the low end, like 4 formal workouts on the low end, and 6 to 7 workouts on the high end a week, with walks every day. I don't really consider that a formal workout. That's more of like my vitamin D, like my rest break, my podcast walk, connecting with my husband, connecting with my dog, getting outside, just like a grounding sort of practice versus like what I consider as a formal workout. From a nutrition and fueling standpoint, I take creatine every day. I take my normal supplements. I hydrate throughout, and I have dark chocolate throughout. I definitely incorporated that in there, and that is regardless of the phase of the cycle that I'm in. So what I think is nice about the menstrual cycle is that some things don't have to change, right? Most things probably shouldn't change. How we view them might a little bit, or our reasoning behind doing them might. For example, with our workouts, you'll see that the style of my workouts doesn't really change. It's just why and how I might modify them at certain points, and how many I do per week might change at certain points, because again, those 7-day a week workouts is usually when my body is prepped and primed for recovery. So nothing really changes that much with my menstrual cycle and how I live my life, except there are sort of, I guess, knobs that I turn to ramp up or ramp down certain parts of my workouts, my fueling, my motivation, my work life, based on how I feel throughout my menstrual cycle. So that's my hope, is that sharing my month in a life, menstrual cycle in a life with you, that you gain some insight into how to structure your own months, how to learn about your body in order to be able to structure your month and look at your life through the lens of the menstrual cycle too. So with that, starting with my period. So again, this is typically days 1 through 5 for me. Some of my key symptoms are cramping, bloating. I have like a restless leg syndrome sometimes. I hate when that happens, but that does happen sometimes. Overall, I'm pretty fatigued. I have temperature dysregulation and I have poor sleep. So for workouts, days 1 to 2 are a pretty heavy bleed for me. That's when I have the most cramping, the most bloating. I feel the most fatigued. So sometimes I do a very modified strength training workout. Sometimes I actually do feel powerful and great, and I'll do a strength training workout, full send. If I'm cramping, I will oftentimes try to motivate myself to do core work, because core work actually really helps my cramping symptoms. Or I'll do some sort of period cramping flow that will be on the menstrual cycle program. So I'll do some sort of soft tissue work and some sort of movement flow to help with the cramping and bloating that I have on my period. And then sometimes I just don't feel like working out at all, whether that's because I have the restless leg syndrome or I'm just feeling so blah, so fatigued, did not get good sleep at all, and I take that time to rest. So as you can see, my period can vary a lot with how I feel for workouts, but I really do just try and compare, oh, I'm actually feeling pretty good on my period compared to last month. Maybe I can push it a little more in my workouts. Or, you know what? I am feeling so much more fatigued. Maybe that's a sign that I need to take it a little bit more relaxed with how much weight I'm lifting, how many reps I'm doing, how many hill sprints I'm doing, if that's the workout that I chose for that day. So it just sort of fluctuates, and I'm able to, since I've been tracking for so long, compare one of my periods to another to sort of have that gauge. So that's one of the benefits of tracking, is that over time you start to understand patterns in your own body. So that's my hope. For fueling, again, lots of water because of the bloating. Overall, I tried to build my plate with the rule of thirds that we talked about in Mel's episode, because this time I'm not that hungry, but I know that I need to fuel. And so sometimes it's hard for me to actually get hungry and get the nutrients that I need. So I really do try and build my plate based on that rule of thirds that Mel talked about, to at least get the nutrients and get some fuel that I need. And then again, dark chocolate always, because yes, regardless of the phase, I am a sucker for some dark chocolate. From a rest and recovery standpoint, this is the time where I usually always take a nap. I am such a huge napper on my period, possibly because my body is just working on that shedding, possibly because I get such poor sleep over my period. Either way, it contributes to me wanting to take a nap on my period. These are also the weeks where I typically only get in 4 workouts, possibly because, again, I'm prioritizing that recovery, I'm prioritizing that rest, and my body is not necessarily feeling the best to work out back to back to back days at such a high intensity. For my mindset on my period, it typically actually, my motivation levels typically run a little bit lower. It sort of switches to more of this rest flow state a little bit, where I'm not trying to push or grow. I'm really taking that time to rest, reflect, recover, and sometimes some of my most creative ideas come because of my period forcing me to take that gap of rest. For work, I usually just try and do something that doesn't take a lot of mental effort or fear of rejection or growth or pushing. So usually that's editing podcast episodes, that's writing different blog posts. It's a lot of behind the scenes, just sort of solitary work. I put this in here for outfits I love, but anything with a thick, loose waistband, loose waistbands are my thing on my period. Same with loose bra strap bands, because again, I don't want to constrict my rib cage to impede that breath flow. that really helps that cramping and that bloating. And again, just how my body and my pelvic floor respond to some of the tightening and contractions and tensioning that happens during the period phase of my cycle. So lastly, a few disclaimers for this phase in my menstrual cycle, but sometimes I feel super strong on day one, which means I will go straight into my strength training workouts or HIIT workouts. I definitely do less workouts on my period typically, and they are typically less intense, but then sometimes I will surprise myself. So again, it's not this hard and fast rule. That's really what I'm trying to show, is that just because someone says you have to do yoga on your period does not mean that that is what's going to be best for your body. My body fluctuates month to month, and that's totally okay. Sometimes I do feel better after a workout on my period. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I feel just the same. But either way, I'm always happy to have done it. But sometimes I'm like, wow, that was really great, especially after a core work, because sometimes that surprises me. When you're feeling like bloated and crampy, the last thing you really want to do is a core work. So sometimes I get very shocked when I'm like, oh my gosh, my cramping is so much better, my bloating is so much better after this core work. So again, this is probably the prime example of the individualized nature of it all between like person to person, but then also within me as an individual. So when it comes to the follicular phase, that's until about day 14-ish. Some of my key like signs and symptoms: great recovery, great sleep. I'm very proud of myself in this phase. Lower heart rate, increased heart rate variability, more motivation. Like, this is the time I usually typically feel like a champ. Workouts, these are the weeks I will fit in quite a few runs, hill sprints, heavier strength training workouts, HIIT, core work. I typically get like 6 to 7 full days of workouts in, like formal workouts in this week, because again, my body's just feeling really good, really strong, and recovering really, really well. For fueling, my blood sugar levels are very balanced in this phase, and you might notice that too. I have less cravings. So this is probably the phase where I am actually healthier in my meals, or the most healthy in my meals, because I'm not looking to put things on my plate because I'm craving it. It's more because of fueling, which I love, because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, all the vegetables, all the protein, all the carbs, and it's because I feel good, not necessarily because I'm like craving something because my blood sugar levels are out of whack. For rest recovery, again, I've kind of mentioned this, but sleep is great in this phase. I reach the lowest heart rate possible that I ever reached throughout my month and throughout my menstrual cycle, and my body recovers super duper well. So I'm able to work out more consistently throughout this phase. As far as mindset goes, I have very high motivation, like room for growth. I'm always like pursuing different like growth opportunities, different learning opportunities. I can sometimes get burnt out on the amount of growth or learning or pushing I am doing in my work and life during this phase. Like, I'll go through the follicular phase and be like, oh my gosh, all of these opportunities, saying yes to so many different things, putting so many different things on my plate. And then I'm like, whoa, hang on, a little burnt out by the time I finish that phase, because I'm just like, I did so much. Maybe I need to dial it back next time. So that's one of my challenges in this phase, is like trying to hit that right balance. And I don't think I've found that quite yet, but I'm working on it. I'm most productive in this phase, and I'm more optimistic with failure and rejection during this phase. So talking about approaching opportunities versus wanting to avoid failures. And we've had an episode on this before, but our mindset is sort of shifted to want to approach opportunities versus wanting to avoid failures. Both good, but my mindset's shifted towards more avoiding failures. And most of our mindsets are shifted towards avoiding failures in the back half of our cycle, and we approach opportunities in the front half. So I definitely like follow that trend for my own cycle. In the ovulatory phase, I have this kind of all categorized as workouts, nutrition, mindset. This is sort of a transitional phase. On the menstrual cycle program, I call it like follicular-ish or luteal-ish, where some months I'm shifted more towards how I feel in my follicular phase. Sometimes I'm shifted more towards how I feel in the luteal phase. So I will basically alter how I do things in this ovulatory phase based on how I'm feeling closer to that follicular phase, like that go, that good recovery. I can lift the heavy weights and recover really well. I can push that heart rate max and recover really well. Or sometimes I'm just like, whoa, I burnt myself out with all of the motivation and all of the like pushing with my work goals in that phase, that I need some time to just like chill and rest and reset and refocus. So this phase, again, is sort of this transitional zone that can fall almost on either end of that spectrum for me. And then lastly, for my luteal phase, some of the key symptoms: poor sleep, I slowly get more fatigued throughout my luteal phase, although I will usually see an uptick in motivation directly after ovulation and then slowly decline. And I kind of wonder if that's not because I just spent like my follicular phase like pushing, growing, learning, like really going after opportunities, and the ovulatory phase I'm just like chill out a little bit, and then finally once that like rest has happened, I'm able to like, okay, I'm feeling more motivated now. So I kind of wonder if that's the reason that I feel that way particularly, because I don't know if that's going to be similar for you guys at all, but something that I've noticed within my own body, which is why it's important, and I'm trying to stress the importance of individualized tracking. For workouts, I typically try and do the exact same workouts, but I might not be able to push the intensity as much, given that my body is just, you kind of know it. Like if you work out and you're feeling a little bit more blah, you kind of know that it's not the day to push the heavy weights. It's not the day to run that extra 3 hill sprints that you were planning on doing. So I do similar workouts, but I might not push it as much, and I might take a few days recovery in between, or a few more days of recovery, rather than pushing those like 6 or 7 workouts that I do in the follicular phase. This phase, again, I might shift back more towards that 5 days a week and focusing on similar workouts, just at a slightly like modified intensity that matches how my body is recovering and approaching those workouts. From a fueling standpoint, I do have more cravings, so I try and be aware that in general, like we have salty and sweet, right? So if I'm craving something salty, what am I missing? Can I fuel that with like more of a vegetable hummus dip or sauerkraut? And if I'm craving sweet, what about a fruit? So I try and be aware of that. But hey, I'm still going to be eating the chocolate and the candy and all the things and the salty chips and queso and all of that if I can get my hands on it. Lots of hydration in this phase because my digestion does feel off and I usually feel pretty puffy, which brings me to the point that Dr. Katie made in her episode about creatine loading. I am actually in the middle of creatine loading during my luteal phase right now, which is a recommendation she had where you do 20 grams of creatine 5 days in a row. And it just helps to, or the research has shown it helps your recovery with workouts. It helps you feel more powerful, but it also helps shift where you are kind of storing the water, because you do have an ability to retain water and be a little puffier in this phase. But loading on creatine can help shift that distribution of water into the muscles. And so I'm just now trying this cycle for the very first time after her recommendation. And I could tell you I do feel less puffy. I feel a big difference with that. I'm trying to think workout wise if I've been able to tell a difference. I've had honestly pretty low motivation of workouts this week, so I can't say whether or not I like feel it, but I am going to be trying it for multiple cycles. But the puffiness factor, definitely. Like typically at this stage, I am feeling like just generally more puffy. And I do feel that like shift in that water distribution, or what I think is that shift in that water distribution since I have been loading creatine over the last few days. I'll link that episode below too. That way, if you guys missed it, you can go listen. We did an entire creatine deep dive, but we also looked at fueling, performance, and training through the lens of the menstrual cycle, which was super duper helpful. From a rest recovery standpoint in the luteal phase, poor sleeps, and this is where I start to sprinkle in some naps depending on what my body needs. For mindset and work, I definitely had the lowest motivation. I'm the hardest on myself during this phase. I have a greater fear of failure and fear of rejection, and I'm more negative overall with like the projection of my work and my business. So I think more negative thoughts, I guess, during this time, and I am less likely to seek out those growth opportunities because of a fear of failure. So I've been able to give myself grace with that and understand, okay, maybe this is not the time to like push, push, push and do that. It's a time where my body is telling me, hey, rest, chill out a little bit, like take this time to give yourself a little bit of grace for having those thoughts, knowing that that's not really how you feel. That's just how the body is structured in order to go into that mode of protection. So again, these disclaimers kind of go along with it, but it is nice to know the ebbs and flows for my mindset. Rather than beating myself up about something, I'm able to understand where my brain chemistry is at and give myself grace. Sometimes I do have motivation all the way up until my period, which is a huge blessing because I've been tracking this over time and just realized that very typically I have lower motivation. So whenever I do get this like random burst, I'm like, great, this is awesome. I'm so happy to have this in my luteal phase. So again, it can change person to person, but can also change within yourself as well. So some of the overarching themes, our menstrual cycles help us understand that we need seasons. Our life is seasons. We have the actual seasons. We have months of the year. If you have a faith denomination of some sort, I'm Christian, we have seasons throughout the Christian season, as they have seasons throughout many of the religions, because we realize that there's a time of rest, there's a time of growth, there's a time of maintenance. And so our menstrual cycles are a nice way as women for us to realize and listen to our bodies and respond to the natural seasons that we need within the month within our menstrual cycles. Menstrual cycles are individualized and even individualized within each person, but it helps to give ourselves grace and know when to push and when to hold back for ourselves by learning your own menstrual cycle. It is like the ultimate way to listen to your body. And I know that's such a silly phrase and probably frustrates so many of you, but when they say listen to your body, I feel like this is the lens that I like to look at it through. And this is the lens, like the lens of the menstrual cycle, looking at my body through that lens has really helped me to understand what that phrase means and really has helped me to like actually listen to my body. So I hope you enjoyed this menstrual cycle in my life month long sort of debrief of what I do, how I structure different things throughout my month based on my menstrual cycle. And again, I encourage you guys to just, if you don't already, I know many of you probably do, but just track and start to think of some of these things. I'd also love to hear your trends because I'm sure because I've been tracking, I'm like attuned to, oh, my workouts, my fueling, my motivation levels. But you might also notice something that I'm not as attuned to in my own body that I need to be more aware of. So if you notice something in your own menstrual cycle and you're like, oh my gosh, I noticed that I can't even think of something on the spot right now, something super random that maybe I, you know, feel that too, but I'm just not as attuned to it because I'm thinking about all of these other things within my menstrual cycle. So please tell me what you guys find as well. And I hope you got some inspiration and some like ideas for how to go about your life and how simple it can be to look at your life and look at what you do throughout each menstrual cycle through the lens of the menstrual cycle. So thank you guys for listening. If you want to sign up for the program, I'll leave the link below for when it releases tomorrow. But thank you guys, and I'll see you guys again on the next episode of Wellness Fixes the Pod.